Ben, I want to say up front, you are constructive over the long term on this name. Just walk us through why the change now.
Yeah, I didn't want to make it about the spat or dispute between the president and Elon Musk. This was something that we had contemplated for quite a while. I do think that the valuation has got ahead of itself around Robotaxi. It's a very big event for Tesla. It's been in the works for a long time. I do think that two things: it's going to be higher competition when you get out there. Waymo, others. I do think the rollout will take longer. I do think that at first it will require more people, so people in control centers, making sure that the cars don't get into accidents if there's something like that, and so the economics will not be as good as they could be over the long term. And so I think that as we get through this, the hype dies down and it becomes reality, and rolling this out will be very difficult. Not to say that Tesla's not done very difficult things in the past. I think there are other risks, though. I mean, key person risk outside of the president and Musk's spat. I think that retaining talent is something that I worry about. We did see the head of the Optimus program leave recently. The best thing about Tesla is their employees, innovation there. I think they'll always be able to recruit very strong engineers. This makes it a little more difficult. And then just very near term, I do think that numbers are too high for deliveries. We're seeing, a lag in all auto sales, but, with Tesla and, the brand damage that has occurred in different regions, I think that that's a risk as well. And then we have tariff risk, and we can go on for other risks as well. And so we thought it was time to just go to the sidelines for now. We do remain constructive in the long term. Short, intermediate term, though, I think there's downside to the stock.
So, Ben, let's unpack some of this. So, three buckets of risk. We've got lofty expectations, key man risk, and competition. Ben, can we just sit on competition for a beat? Where is the competition coming from? Who do you worry about?
Well, in China, I think is the most fierce competition on the electric vehicle side. In the United States, I think that the ride-hailing robotaxi service is going to have competition from the likes of the incumbents of Uber and Lyft to Waymo to others. There are several other companies out there. Amazon has a company that is working on autonomy as well. And so I think that the economics will not be as lofty as some people think. Additionally, it is also a consumer product. And so when we worry about brand damage for vehicle sales, you have to wonder about any kind of brand damage when you start getting into a car without a driver. And then third, in Europe, I think you have a host of competition, and lots of bears over the years have talked about competition, and it hasn't really gone anywhere. But now you have the likes of BYD selling into Europe. Tesla sales were better in the last month than BYD, but BYD is catching up with them. And then you also have Germany that are making a big push for their domestic OEMs, auto manufacturers, giving some types of credits or breaks on their cars to try to catch up with Tesla as well. And so you kind of have it coming in all different directions right now.
On the driverless vehicle side of things, we also learned this morning that Uber would be partnering up with a company called Wave to try to launch robo-taxis in the UK. Ben, a really tried and true business model for tech had been prove it works in America and then export it abroad. When it comes to a robo-taxi for Tesla, is that option, is that business model for growth not as available to them because of the brand damage you've been talking about?
I think it is. And I think one thing, about the key person risk and Elon, this double-edged sword. I remember, during the Biden administration, Elon gets on a plane and goes and meets with Xi, and just out of the blue. He had, his reach stretches very far. I think that, there are difficulties in China about data. They have made progress there. Europe is a little more, the EU is a little more bureaucratic, I think, and more difficult, like a patchwork, to get approval there. In the US, one of the fundamental things that the relationship between the Trump administration and Musk had going for it is to try to have a blanket federal rule about advancing autonomy versus the patchwork state way that we have it right now. So I think they'll be able to move outside of the United States in this. I think it takes time. One of the advantages they have is they're going for this all visual, all camera approach versus much higher cost for a Waymo. A Waymo vehicle costs over $200,000, and so it's much more capital intensive. There's still a big debate whether Tesla's approach will work in the long term, but that remains to be seen.
Ben, just before you go, I know you don't want to make the downgrade about the spat between Elon Musk and the president, but I'd love a comment from you on that. Do you think we made too much of a big deal of that about what it means for the stock? What was your general reaction to how that played out?
Well, I think it's bad for our country, and I love our country, and I think that being public in this dispute like that, and it got pretty racy. I don't think that's good for anyone. Tesla, SpaceX, Elon's other companies, some of the most, if not the most innovative companies in our country right now, and getting down and dirty in the sandbox doesn't do anyone any good.